It's 12 o'clock in Frisco, Texas, and it's time for Smoker Broker Radio with Robert Mesh, a.k.a. the Smoker Broker. Robert is the owner of Small World Realty and has employed hundreds of real estate agents in his 17-year career. He has instructed and mentored over 10,000 real estate agents at the highly acclaimed Champions School of Real Estate and is considered an expert in Texas residential realty. Robert is also an advocate of true entrepreneurial spirit and has helped many to transition from corporate America into the world of self-employment. And now live from the studio to your world, the Smoker Broker.
Hey, welcome to Smoker Broker. I'm Robert Mesh, and I'm the guy they call Smoker Broker. Happy Thursday. Hope everything's going well. Getting into the spring. Talked about we had summer season or spring season coming in selling-wise, but there really is no such thing in Texas because we just keep on going. It's really, there's been no fall or winter type of selling season. We've been in a strong type of volume for a long time now, and it's going to keep on going. Whether it's good or bad, we'll see. There are tons of articles you could read all day long talking about the theories. Some are conspiracy, some are regular, about where the market is going, where it's heading. And the honest truth is not one damn one of us know. We cannot put a finger on what the market will do. I will tell you what I have been reading, and one thing I do agree with is that so many people continue to point to the market being out of whack and that the market is way above where it should be, but in all honesty, it's adjusting to what it should have been for the longest time, especially in Texas. There's a lot of people that continue to have a panic state about the market and its dangers. You see all these articles about, oh, this is awful, what's happening, blah, blah, this, blah, blah, that. But in reality, the market is really moving to where it should have been for the longest time. Texas has always been underwhelmed when it comes to value, and it's finally catching up. And maybe it is because California has helped us see their ways as well and pushed our values up. But the one thing that anybody really can't fight if they want to, and they're concerned about it, is the fact that there are millions of Texans that have made a bundle on their home and have tons of equity in their home. And that's not something to be frowned upon. That's a good thing. It's a good thing to be having equity in your home, and it's a good thing that the market is healthy depending on how you look at it. And I've said this on many shows before, and we're going to continue to say it until we're out of this, is that this is not like any market we've had previous where we are concerned about the market dropping or bottoming out or bubbling. Most of the time those markets happen or when the market's depressed, there's way too much inventory and there's no buyers and the interest rates are sky high. We have none of those. We have to where there's not enough inventory. We have where the interest rates are as low as they probably ever can be, and we have a line of buyers about 10 miles long.
The buyers are depressed.
And the buyers are depressed. Yeah, the buyers are depressed. There's some truth to that too. And that continues to push through that one way or another, those people are going to get a house at some point. It's just a matter of when. And when you have that type of scenario, the real estate market's not going anywhere. In fact, it should be the only thing that's dependable in this economy moving forward, especially as we emerge from COVID and get back to some type of normalcy. And it does appear we are getting back to normal. I'm probably more surprised than anybody. I really thought that a lot of the COVID restrictions would remain in place and actually maybe become a norm, throughout, but I don't see that anymore. I don't see that. I see this returning to normal here in the next month or so. We even have vaccination clubs and hubs in Texas closing. TMS is going to stop. They announced this morning that they are not going to have the full vaccination starting next month. They're going to finish the second rounds, and after that, you go to the doctor just like anybody else. So we have reached the reality that if you want to be vaccinated, you can anywhere in this country. You probably can go to your primary physician and get that done. Most of the grocery stores even have it at this point. So we really have, immersed into a flu type based scenario where we have, they don't call them boosters, but they might as well, because that's what's going to happen. And every public place that you see right now is returning to if they haven't already returned to a norm, they're slowly doing it. If you've noticed in the last couple of weeks, the instructions in a public domain are something like, whereas before you had to have a mask on, those places have kind of moved to, we strongly suggest you have a mask on. Then you have some places that say it's your choice whether you have a mask on. And then you see some that are backing off their procedures that they've been doing. Like I've noticed some of the places, they've stopped doing the temperature, which I don't know why we ever did that because it didn't matter anyways, especially the fake temperature. That's been my favorite over the entire COVID. There's been a lot of hypocrisy in COVID, but my favorite is the fake temp. That's where someone does this and doesn't even look at it because they have no intention of telling you have a fever or you can't go in. They literally do that so you can walk. Those are coming to an end. And I really do believe as we get to July, maybe even June, we are back to as normal as we can get. Maybe a smaller workforce, maybe a decreased workforce with decreased workspace. I think that's the last thing that falls through with COVID is what is the end result in the commercial space? How many people have decreased their office counts? And that's going to be the one last thing to look at. But I think once we pass that, we go back to living our lives as to what we deem to be normal and worry about the normal things that have always scared us, whether we have a heart attack, whether we have cancer, whether we have things that are hard to stop, which honestly, those should have been things that have been scary the entire time, even through COVID. But it does look like we're going to get back to some type of normalcy. It'll be interesting to see how the economy pans out, where it spans, where it goes. Does it grow? Does it fall? Everything in real estate is connected to that. The hope becomes that real estate drives it and holds it at center core because it is the one most reliable piece of an asset you can have that will continue to thrive most of the time and in most markets, which is why we like being real estate agents, which is why we like practicing real estate, because we do believe it is one of the most stable inventory investment type of things you can have when you start looking at cash, when you start looking at investments, mutual fund stocks. The one constant in this country has always been housing. Now, hypocritically, and we talked about this the other day too, we continue to face that this has always been a primary function, a primary goal of almost every American is to own a home. And it's always been deemed to be the American dream, that home ownership is the American dream. And we talked last week and the week before that there's a little bit of a threat to that right now because not everybody who's capable of owning a house can have one. That's a problem right now. That's a problem. In fact, that's probably the biggest problems we have as we move in to the summer and into the fall, is us as a country deciding, is that okay that people who have good credit and have decent incomes are not able to buy a house? Do we believe that's the country we want to, I'm not going to say live in as much as believe in and have the support, because that has always been a function that we believe you can have a home ownership. In fact, that's what's always been the light of the world, is that the United States is a place that you can go and own a home. And it's threatened just a bit. And the fact that we swim in real estate daily, it bothers us too. We have clients as we speak, everybody on this call and everybody on the or in this podcast, and everybody that we have work for us have people that want to buy a house that can. And that becomes trying at some point. And you get to a point where you have, you don't know what to tell them. And you're basically telling someone that they can't have something that they really should be able to want. And that's making it a little tough for us as we go into the summer. In fact, it's putting just a little bit of a dim on what has been a bright real estate market for us. It's just putting a little bit of a damper on it because it just can't be full joy. In fact, if anything, it's a killjoy, because that those people are out there and it's a bother. And we're going to have to address it at some point. It's hard for me too, even the people that I represent, and good friends too that are buying investment property. And it's my job to help them, but even I have to kind of back off sometimes. And I feel bad when I see that they're pushing a lot of money over someone who doesn't have as much money but deserves to have a house but can't have it because this person has more money and they're outbidding them. When you start having moral ethics to yourself, meaning you're empathetic towards other people's concerns, And that can be a problem as a real estate agent, because if you care enough, it starts getting at you. It starts bothering you that you can't put someone in a home one day, but then you put somebody else into a home that really it's like the third or fourth home and they had a ton of money and they were able to push somebody else. Or worse, which is the one I don't like, is when you have tons of people pulling together and pushing other people around because they have a bunch of money that they teamed up. And y'all, if we do that, then it really becomes a line of who has the most money in the biggest syndicate, who can buy everything then. You know, at what point does it stop? Where do we stop and say you can't do that? We're concerned about population growth. We're concerned about where people go, where they live, where they work. You know, how many apartments can we put up? How many people should be in apartments? How many people should be leased? And you start getting into serious concerns about the trickle-down effect of the economy. Because again, real estate drives this economy. You know, it comes off as kind of a negative vibe. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be fixed. It just depends on how we do it. Depends on how we do it and how the market supports it. So those are some big things that we're dealing with in the market. We always start the show off with an update, and that is the update. That is what's going on right now. That is what we're living with daily, and we're having to get through it the best we can and making sure that we're monitoring, doing our part to do what's right as real estate agents. As always, I bring my crew on. I like them to be with me. They are a lot smarter than I am, and they tend to really run the show better than I can. So I always like to bring on Brent and Mike. They are good co-hosts of mine and longtime friends and strong real estate agents and leaders in my firm, and probably do a better job of running it than I can. So I like having them on. I like getting their advice and their opinions and listening to them, especially with what we're talking about today. Today is going to be a subject that probably gets watched quite a bit amongst the agents, especially the newer ones, because it's probably one of the most misunderstood subjects when it comes to agency, but not the agency topic that we usually talk about. This time we're going to be specific. We're actually going to go into the intro of agency. We're going to open the door that gets you into agency, and that door starts with a document that's called the Information About Brokerage Services. You know, you can almost, a lot of people mistake it for IBS, which it's not. It's IABS. The A is important. If you don't have the A, it gets concerning to everybody else. As usual, with the Texas Real Estate Commission, Texas Association of Realtors, they choose to have long names. That document is nothing short of being an agency disclosure. You said someone wanted to call it a long-ass name to make it popular or professional. I don't know. But in the end, it is an agency disclosure. And it's significant to understand the laws of agency. Now, we have people that do watch the shows in other states. Most of our audience is in the core major cities of Texas, but we do occasionally have someone that, especially inside the Keller Network, this gets pushed to a lot of the people in the Keller Williams Network, and a lot of them follow us and they see us from other states. So this is going to be a little bit of a different conversation. For those of you who are in different states, this is referring to dual agency. We're kind of talking about getting into dual agency and the understanding of what can you do in dual agency, what can you not do. This document is kind of spelling out the rules for what can be done. So you have something similar in a lot of states, but we're one of the few that actually spells it out, like literally. Now, if you're an academic in agency and the IABS, it's actually fascinating to see how we got here. Well,
you're like Marco Rubio with your sip of water.
Well, I don't have a choice. My mouth gets so dry if I don't, I'll start choking or foaming at the mouth like a dog or something. So I almost have to. So look, this is a fun bit. Everybody knows I teach quite a bit. This is one of my favorite things to teach because it's something I've specialized in for a long time. So, it's funny. At the beginning of the show, the intro always talks about it. It says like I expertise in something. I never liked anybody to say that about me because I think it's hard to expertise in a subject. But I will tell you, I do expertise in this particular subject. I've spent plenty of time on it. Literally over 15 years learning it because it's difficult. More than anybody else. Or most people, because if you have to teach this stuff. You have to really know the back ends of it. And most people don't ever go through the trouble to learn it. So I promise you, the next 45 minutes or so, we talk about takeaways on the show. This is going to be a good one because most people don't sit down with you on this document and tell you how to do it. Okay? So let's talk about the history as to how we got it. Let's see if my two guys over here, let's see how good they are at understanding if they remember. Do either of you two remember where the stuff comes from? Do you know why we have it? Do you know where it came from? I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it's funny if it was.
Well,
y'all remember it all?
Well, are we going back to?
This is not something I've ever taught y'all.
Well, are we talking about the history back until, was it 1990?
That's good.
94?
95. That's good. So
95.
You had the right, and Mike got the right date. So it's 95. That's good. I'm impressed.
Yeah, where all agents worked for the seller.
Or what?
All agents worked for the seller. So
that's
therefore,
good.
buyers had no clue who represented who.
Okay. That's close. That's close. So,
Such a jerk. He's going to go say the exact same thing, but he's just going to put flair in it.
I'm not.
It's going to change one word.
I'm super impressed with both of y'all because
No, you're not.
that is not something I would expect y'all to answer because you really have to have studied it for quite some time to get it. But I'm super impressed that y'all had the gist of what it is. So let me give you the technical definition of what they were trying to say pretty much in the same way. So up until 1995 in the state of Texas, most people are surprised by the fact that there was no such thing as a buyer representation agreement, meaning anything prior to 1995, every deal that was done, you were never technically represented by an agent if you were a buyer. The only person that ever was really represented was the seller. There's really only one document, too. The only document was, in fact, a listing agreement. It's funny, it was only 2 pages, and now it's like, 10, as everything else is. But that was the only document that specified rules as to who did what and who got paid what. So it's funny, a lot of times when I have this discussion, especially if you bought houses prior to 1995, a lot of times some people don't like this discussion because they're like, that's not at all what happened to me, and that's not what I was told. And you're the reason why we're discussing this, because it's you that caused this whole thing, not Brent. He wasn't born yet or close to it. So we're talking about people that had to go through and filter and say what's going wrong. Because I'm going to tell you, prior to 1995, and this is usually a longer conversation that I have with core agencies or core agency, but I'm going to shorten it. But what happened is prior to 1995, most people had no idea who represented them. Buyers especially. Buyers had the assumption that if they were working with a real estate agent, that they were representing. Hell, they even called them their agent. That's the best part. They would even call them their agent. There's no such truth. In fact, there's not even anything that can legally document at that point in time that they're their agent, right? This isn't that long ago either. 95 is not all that far back if you look at the history of real estate. It's not that long ago that we figured out that something was terribly wrong. And that is exactly what happened. In the state of Texas, those guys down the real estate commission and the legislature, they got so many complaints about people saying, I thought this guy represented me. That someone finally said, hey, this is all screwed up. This whole damn thing, the way we do this, is screwed up. Now, let me tell you about the significant points. These are the takeaways already from what the problems were prior to 1995. So to understand the IABS, you have to understand some of the history behind it, right? So prior to 1995, you don't have to tell anybody who you work for. You honestly don't even have to tell anybody who you are. You literally could shake their hand. If they said they want to go show a house, you could go show them. There's really no rules in place. There's no buyer representation agreement. So nothing says a buyer works for you on your behalf. All there are sellers out there trying to sell their home with an agent who actually was the agent to the seller, but that's it. All right? So when you meet somebody, there's nothing that's necessary to them. You don't have to tell them anything. Now, that can be concerns if you think about you meeting somebody who you know is a real estate agent, they start asking you questions, and you start answering. If you knew that that person represented somebody else or possibly could represent somebody else, especially on a property that you were thinking about, would you say just about anything? I mean, don't you think there's some things that you probably cover up?
I wouldn't.
Brent, what are some of the things that we talk about when we go through, and let's do like a 1980 before you were born to a 19 before a 2000 the child that you are to 2020 right now, 21 or whatever. When you're asking, when you have a buyer and they start asking you questions about when they're ready to put an offer on, what do those questions look like? What do they ask us? What does somebody, if they want to put an offer, what do they usually ask us on a house?
How low do you think we can go? Like, what's the
Right, how
cheapest we can
low?
get the house for?
That's a good one.
How much should we put down? It's negotiable. How quick can we close? It's usually mostly price. Those what they're going to be asking. As far
Sure.
as,
but you're alluding to the thing. Dallas, what is he everything he's talking about? What is he asking me? What is he asking me as an agent? What are those questions? What are they?
Oh,
what does he want from me?
I see what you're saying. The technical term,
Dallas.
Dallas.
Are you talking like way back when? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, no, way back then and now. What does he want from me when he's asking those questions? If he asks me, who's a real estate agent, those questions, what does he want from me?
Answers.
Which are?
Which agent am I?
If you're the buyer, if you're on the buyer side, or anybody for that matter.
Check your phone, Dallas.
Why is Frank giving you a cheat sheet?
Okay,
They can't cheat you.
So he's asking. So no, they're going to be asking for advice.
That's right. They want advice from me. All right. And we also sometimes term advice and the other one, which would be opinions, right? Now, this is important. This is one of those conversations that seems to go in a circle, but you better damn well pay attention, because all of this comes back to one point we're trying to make. And it's probably the most sacred point in agency, is understanding advice and opinions. If you want a big takeaway from the show, as a real estate agent, you have to understand the difference between advice and opinions, right? That's the first part of this. So none of this stuff exists. No, there's no disclosure of anything, no disclosure of who you work for, who you are. Nobody knows who they work for. You have buyers telling agents things that they would have never told them if they knew that they were working with a seller. You got a buyer asking an agent, hey, how much do you think I should offer? And the agent either telling them that, you should offer as much as you can, or they don't do their duty and say, you should offer this. Because remember, they don't represent that buyer. If they don't represent that buyer, they cannot give them, Dallas, what?
Advice and opinions.
Advice and opinions. They can't give it to them. Now, if the wheels are spinning fast enough this afternoon, that's one of the points here, is that if there's no such thing as a buyer representation, then that means that they are not a client. And if they are not a client, it means that they're a customer. And we don't give customers advice and opinions. That's another big takeaway from the show, is to understand that clients get advice and opinions, customers don't. So if you're back prior to 1995 and you got someone asking you these questions, you kind of have a problem, because they actually expect you to answer those questions. You both agree that those are reasonable questions to ask a real estate agent if you're going to put an offer in, right?
I do.
Yeah.
Well, see, back then they thought that agent was working for them.
They did. And that's exactly where we're going with this, is that they did think that.
But it was an assumption.
It's exactly right. You stole the word right out of my mouth. It
Boom.
was an assumption. An assumption
Is that why it tasted like Fireball?
Assumptions suck. They are the worst of the worst. In fact, even anytime I say I assume, it sickens me if I remember that I said it, because it's a terrible thing to make an assumption. Most people usually assume like a jackass, and they're wrong. They usually assume wrong. And this is a great time frame for this conversation, because that person who assumed, just because the person called themselves a real estate agent, that they actually work for them was a terrible assumption, because there absolutely wasn't any truth. And to be honest, it was the exact opposite. Not only did they not work for them, they actually worked for somebody else who was trying to hurt them. Right? So you got all these people out there who have this belief and think this, right? You start having all these lawsuits, all these ethical complaints, people complaining about, hey, that guy tricked me. He was supposed to represent me. He didn't tell me anything. State looks at it, and over time they're like, good Lord, this is a mess. Not only does the buyer feel like they're being cheated, then the seller thinks that they're being cheated. Nobody trusts anybody. So we got to start all over. So in 1995, they all put their heads together, probably sound like a bunch of bowling pins or whatever, and they're like, hey, this isn't right. 50 years later, we're not doing this correct. In reality, that's what this really becomes. Again, I talked about how this is, if you're an academic, it's so interesting about this subject. To think that in 1995, somebody couldn't understand that maybe some rules should be in place on talking about who's who and who works for who is just about insane as it gets. That's a long time for us to practice real estate, for someone to say, this doesn't make any sense to me at all. All right? So, in 95, the Senate passes a bill, Senate Bill 489. This is what Brenton Dulles know, they just didn't say. They pass a bill, and they say, enough. New rules. Start over. Dump out everything, and we're going to rebuild this whole thing. And the first thing we're going to start off with is starting to say that when you meet somebody, you have to at least tell them who you are, who you work for, and who you represent. This is what we call the disclosure of representation. Takeaway number 50 from this episode. When we meet somebody, we're not talking about substantial conversations. We're just talking about general real estate. When we meet them the first time, we have to tell them, hey, my name's Robert Mesh. I work for SWR at Keller Williams. I need to let you know that I represent the seller, if in fact I do represent somebody. And if there's no representation there, you still have to tell them that you're a real estate agent and who you work for. That's what we call the disclosure of representation. Simple enough, right? Doesn't exist prior to 1995. You didn't even have to tell somebody that. Most people did, but they didn't have to, right? But the second one, which is the focus of the show, was the disclosure of agency. And the disclosure of agency is, in fact, the information about brokerage services. Those of you who are still taking the test, that is a great test question that's missed so many times when somebody asks you the question about agency, and everybody says, oh, it's the IABS. But then you go to the answer, the multiple choice, and there's no IABS. So you're like, oh, well, the question must be wrong. No, you just didn't know that the IABS is the same damn thing as disclosure of agency, which in fact is what it really is. It is the disclosure of agency, right? So they create this document that starts to talk about these problems that they had. They realized that enough people didn't understand. So they finally did create a document that, make no mistake, was extremely important. Sadly, it's not used the way it should be today, but they had the right determination to make a document that spelled out a few things. So the information about brokerage services in its most sincere content is actually looking at giving or warning a buyer or a seller that they have rights as a consumer. All right, Mike, what are some of those rights? What's one of them? What's one of the major things that we do as a real estate agent? There are several.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That's not the one. They didn't put pursuit of happiness in the IBS.
That's what I was going to say.
You probably were too. What's one? What's one of the things that we do?
What's one of the things that we do?
In the IBS, what's one of the things that's hinting at that we might do for them?
Oh, well, I mean, we're going to help them. We're going to help them buy.
There you go.
Or
all
sell.
Right, that's good. It took him a long time, but he got the first one right.
Yeah.
That is correct. We're going to help him buy. All right. And his simplistic answer is correct. That's one of the first things on the IBS. It tells them that they have rights as a buyer. So Brent gets off easier here. Brent, what's the other one that it tells them?
I can help you sell.
Rights. Dulles is like, why did you ask him first? So you have rights as a seller, right? So it says you can have rights as a buyer. It says you can have rights as a seller. Let's see if both of you can get the next one. It also says you can have rights as
to be both intermediate.
Both. That's
Intermediate.
right.
Yep.
Might be able to represent both sides. Then it gets into where forget the rights. You can do this on your own if you want. You can go do it yourself if you want to. But it's all specified in one document. Okay? So if you want a very layman's terms on how to explain an IBS, the layman's term for the IBS, and this is a good takeaway too, and I've taught it for a long time. This is a very good way to remember this. The IBS is like a Miranda rights for home buyers and home sellers. And if you read it the way it's supposed to be read, that's exactly what it says. It says, number one, you have the right to be represented as a buyer. You have the right to be represented as a seller. You have the right to actually choose whether one person represents both the buyer and the seller.
And the right to remain silent.
And that's exactly the punchline here.
But
as a customer, you have the right to do this on your own. But let me tell you, anything you say can and will be used against you. And that is exactly what that document says. It is a public warning. And basically, if you ever watch Back to the Future, it's if I were you,
McFly,
I would go get somebody who knows what they're doing. That is the most polite term for the IBS, is that it does in fact tell you, you need to go talk to someone who knows what they're doing. We've told you. We're not trying to ambush you. We're not trying to sneak anything away. We're telling you those are your rights. Doesn't exist prior to 1995. Which is just beyond me how it took so long for someone to say, maybe they should know that. Now, if you're pulling this further, you're like, what's the big deal? All right, let's say in 1988, I'm the real estate agent. Mike's a consumer. He comes to me, heard I did a good job for one of his friends. So I take him to a few houses. And he knows, or he doesn't know, but I know that I don't represent him. And I represent a seller, which is kind of weird because it's a seller I don't even know. That's weird that you work for someone you don't even know, right? So Mike starts popping off the questions. Hey, how much should I offer on this house? What do you think I should do? If I'm doing my job, if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing in 1988, this is so sick. My response to him would have been, well, you just need to tell me what you want to put. That's one, if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Or two, well, they've had a lot of activity on that house. You probably should offer as much as you can.
That kind of sounds like our advice now in this market.
Yeah,
well, go higher.
That is kind of weird, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's sick. We're sitting there telling them to do the opposite of what we should be telling them to do. But that's what I'm supposed to do. That's actually, I'm doing my job by telling him that. Right? Now, if he had gotten IABS in 1988 and had received a disclosure of representation, meaning he knew who I was before he started talking, would he have ever listened to me on the response if I told him how much to offer? Why would he even ask me that question?
Right.
Y'all, this is 1 out of 1,000 things that got stopped when we did this. But it's enough for you to grasp a hold of how important the document was that someone realized that this is dumb. That person should know. So now they had to go out and flat out tell them. And if you had any type of education at all, and I'm talking about even if you were in kindergarten, you would be able to realize that if someone told you that they work for somebody else, you're damn well not going to tell them your intimate thoughts about what you want to do with that house.
Well, you know, I know who doesn't. I don't know who has an education, but I know who does, and that would be our sponsors coming up. I don't know if you want to jump right into
That's
that.
why he's on this show. Let's go ahead. We
All right,
have
we got to do the sponsors and
for our
then
show. We want to get them on here, so let's hit it.
and then remember, I got to run right after the sponsors because I got that walkthrough. So you and Dylan.
Oh,
go.
I did forget that. Yes, very good.
All right. So Martin Cooley with BPG Inspections is our go-to home inspector. We, of course, always give our clients a number of inspectors to choose from, but Martin is the inspector we prefer. He is always on time or early, finishes in a timely manner, gets the report the same day, and all reports are color-coded. Red for serious issues and blue for minor things to look at. You can always book him at bpginspections.com or reach him at 817-401-3240. Right. Earpiece, because when I play my voiceover, it's not going to go. Can you guys still hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And our next sponsor is Mr. Greg Holdberg with Liberator Health Insurance. Your simple solution to affordable healthcare is here. Join the Liberator movement and take control of your healthcare. Use any healthcare plan to fit your healthcare and budget needs. Use any doctor or hospital without a penalty. TeleDoc is included in all plans. No annual deductibles and no copay. Liberator Deal of the Week. A family of 3 got great coverage for $550 per month, including dental and a health savings account. As an independent agency, Liberator is committed to transforming healthcare in Texas through innovative healthcare plans that are affordable and rich in benefits. For more information and to get a quick quote, call or text Greg Holdberg, independent health insurance broker, at 214-886-4688 or visit them at liberatorhealthinsurance.com. And our final, last but not least, Mr. George DiGianni.
Hi, this is George DiGianni. Did you know in 2018 there were 120,000 realtors in Texas? That's the most Texas realtor population they've ever seen. 2 years later, 2020, there are now 140,000 realtors in Texas. Have you taken time to consider what sets you apart from all of your other competitors? Why should a prospect choose you? Well, I'm the only mortgage lender that will help you excel beyond your current level of success by incorporating both my Harvard academic knowledge and my 29 years of business prowess in a consultative session that is free to you. I will impart my knowledge about the business fundamentals you may not have been exposed to in the past. How do we do this? Get in touch with me today, George at sublimefinancial.com.
Cool.
Yeah, love our sponsors. Great guys. Hey, Brent, make sure, remember we got at least 2:30, I think 2:20 need to be at the office, okay?
I'll be there as soon as I can. Yep.
All right, thanks, man.
There, guys.
All right, so thank you, and we always appreciate our sponsors. We talk about it all the time. This is a great show. It's sponsored. We have a lot of agents that watch the show, a lot of real estate, especially inside the Keller Williams community, a lot of other brokerages as well. We average anywhere from 400 to 600 viewers a week on the actual show itself, more or less what's streaming out there too. So great place to advertise, great place to pick up business. We do have a very loyal following of people who watch to learn, especially on a show like today, because this is the type of information that you really don't just learn. Most brokers do not teach at the IBS. In fact, I don't know many that do. And even if they did, it's such a brief encounter. It really doesn't talk about why we have it. And the reason for this, most people don't understand how we have the document or the history of the document. And if you don't understand the history, you don't really understand the appreciation for why we use it. Okay? So we have all these people out there that we know that they need this type of disclosure, that we know we have to tell them what it is that they have rights on, what they can do and what they can't do. But it really changed the face of modern day real estate, because it got it to where people finally understood that this person works for me, this person works for me. I trained or I chose this person. And what eventually became important and that got us closer to modern day real estate is that over the years, after they enacted the Senate Bill 489 and started talking about disclosures of agency and disclosure of representation, they finally got to their ultimate wisdom that it is okay for a buyer to be represented by an agent. And that is where you saw the buyer representation agreements come into play. And with that, it created the playing field for modern day real estate agency, where now you can be represented by an agent as a buyer, and you can get their advice and opinions that are completely separate from the actual seller themselves. So this document became extremely powerful in guiding a lot of other documents that followed it years later. But the most important piece of it is that it became step one in agency. It became the door opening to the rest of agency. Because here's the thing. You can't go forward in agency unless you understand the IABS. If you don't get that, you can't do the rest of this. And that's why the topic is so important that you understand it. So, Mike, we talk a lot about the document itself and why it's important. Let's talk about the actual utilization of the document. How are we supposed to use the document in the field? Give me the technical, what is it that they require of us with that document today?
Get it signed at the first meaningful meeting or talk of real estate with somebody.
Yeah,
Get it signed.
It used to be where you had to, it was meaningful, like in person. And then we got to where we had so much technology with dates and, and phone and email and app that they said, well, that's not necessary anymore. We just have to make sure that it gets out at some point, whether it's via, at one point it was fax, and then it became email, and then it became text. They have to be told that the option is there. Now, here's the hard part that's hard. Everybody knows I'm not shy, I'm blunt, and I don't care when it comes to people who create the documents, whether they're smart, smarter, or why they did the documents, but I will be blunt on the execution of the document. And there's not a soul on the face of this earth that can argue with me about it. It's going to convince me that this is right. They say, just like Mike said, that the document is supposed to be presented on the first meaningful conversation. This is a great takeaway for all new agents. Hell, it's a great takeaway for new agents and existing agents, because even the existing agents don't understand. What are you supposed to do when you're in the grocery store and you have your name tag on? And if you're a good real estate agent, you do that. And somebody asks you, hey, I saw your name badge. I think I know you from wherever, and I know you live in the area that I do. I'm thinking about selling my house right now. It's in this subdivision. What do you think maybe it could sell for? Those are trigger terms for someone who is initiating your advice and your opinions. And when they start initiating comments like that, per the state, we are supposed to tell them of what their rights are. We're supposed to tell them who we are, who we work for, the disclosure representation, and then we're supposed to present to them that they have rights as a buyer or a seller. And this is where this conversation gets weird, because there's not a soul out there that thinks that that's normal to be talking to someone that you just met in a store and say, hang on, before we go any further, I need to give you this document that looks pretty damn litigious, and you need to read it before we talk any further. There's no one.
And sign it.
And sign it. And I love how you said that. It's voluntary whether you sign it, but we have to suggest that they sign it. We have to tell them, hey, look, we need to know that you got that. So he's right. So how does that look? So for the longest time, when we teach this and we joke about it, literally the scenario would be when that would happen to be, hang on for a second, I need to stop you. And then to reach in our shirt and pull out an IABS that was just randomly on us, on our persona, and say, you need to read this. All right? It's just weird. It's just weird. Most average people would be like, get away from me, and never talk to us again. So that was a dumb conversation, how that would work out. Then it got to where they're like, well, maybe if you just send them an email. So while we're talking to somebody that we call strangerly, and we're having a good conversation, at some point we're like, hold on. Let me send this to you via text or email so you can see this. The whole concept itself is weird in the way they say to do it. The reason why we talk about it is I don't think the Real Estate Commission nor the Texas Association of Realtors understands the absurdity of the way they ask us to do it. Because they might sit there and believe that that is normal and okay, but if they look at the percentage of agents that actually do that, it's low. Which means it's defying what they said to do. So what's the point? What's the point if we created a document that has now become so uncomfortable and weird to present that now they just don't do it. And I want to qualify, most of the time we're talking about buyers here. Listings, most of us are okay with bringing the IABS because that seller knows if we're going that far with them that they should have that document. But the buy side, you can't possibly think someone's just going to do that like in the store or the first time they see it. It's tough. Now, there's some people who will watch this and go, well, I do it all the time. Hey, good for you. God knows how many people you lost by acting weird like that, telling them you're going to give them an IABS or something. It's difficult for me too because I'm responsible for teaching this subject, and I have to teach it by the law. I damn well don't agree with it. We begged them for years to change the execution of this. Make no mistake. I actually believe that document is the most important document of any document we sign. I love it. I actually think the document was well stated, well deserved, should have been happening 50 years ago. I just don't agree with the way they ask you to execute getting that document signed and the process and the time frame that you're doing it in. Now, some people will say, well, then what are you supposed to do? I'm like, I don't know the answer, but I would tell you, I would much more be comfortable if I am in that situation in some random place where I say something along the lines of, hey, I don't mind answering that. I just want to make sure you know I'm a real estate agent and I work with a lot of clients out here. So just make sure, if you're going to be in the market for something that you're not overstating telling me something. That is much more professional and much more direct and gets the point across just as well as sending that document over and pointing out these legalities to it. Yet they won't change it. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the show today is that it hit me. We haven't talked about the IABS itself in a while. We talked about agency a lot. Remember we talked the pools of, if you're paying attention, the IABS is pulling you to buyer agency, selling agency, and possible intermediary. These are all separate topics that are much longer. That wasn't the goal today. The goal today was to talk about the one document, the IABS, as to the problems it causes us, not so much the document, but how we present it. And that's dumb. That's dumb when you start having problems with how the document's presented, more or less the intelligence of the document itself. You want a little hint as to when most buyers or buyer agents sign the IABS, if they ever do? Mike, when do you think it is? When do most of them sign it?
When they sign the offer.
Yeah. When they sign the offer. When they sign the offer. The whole
with
purpose,
about 5 other things.
Yeah, right. That's true. So remember, if you remember what the IABS says and what it does, what the hell good does it do to have it signed at the offer if the protection was in the beginning before you even made an offer? I can't tell you the stats, but I promise you it's over 60%. 60% of the agents that give that document at the time they sign an offer. You can argue with me all day you want. And look, one of the things about running a bigger firm is you see it all. You see all that stuff. You don't have to take a poll. The poll comes in all the time. You know how that works. So it's not a matter of really if it's up for discussion. It becomes a matter of, why do we continue to say it has to be a certain way if they don't do it that way? And what goal are we really trying to achieve? And the goal should be that the public is made aware of what their rights are. And that document does a good job of it. So why isn't it just that it has to be communicated before we do all these things? I think that's the better route you take. Now, we're near the end of the hour for us, but I want to take this conversation and show you all the places it goes. Because I told you that it opens the door to agency, but it's more important that it's opening the door on what you're about to do, who you're about to use, and what they're about to do for you. It's basically a wake-up call saying, who is this I'm dealing with? Do I trust this person? What are my rights if I do sign a buyer rep agreement? What are my rights if I do sign a listing agreement? What are my responsibilities? As the consumer and as an agent, what am I supposed to do? What are the rules that I have to follow? And almost everything we teach comes from that document, from some backflow, one way or the other. we're going to be talking about that document. So it's amazing to me how many people come out, we're shown the document, but they don't truly remember what to do with it. It's amazing even more so that the person who trained them didn't tell them that they had to have the damn document. I also find it comical that in a lot of brokerages that the paperwork's not checked until the end of the transaction. That's what we call the old, I can't put the shit back into the horse. What am I supposed to do if I'm checking documents off the day before this person closes and I'm like, hey, they just did an intermediary transaction and they don't have a buyer rep sign, which those of you who have any academics at all, you're not allowed to do an intermediary transaction unless you have a buyer's rep. That's something we learned on our big broker call. Well, I didn't learn it, but I already knew it. But a lot of other people, I love the fact that the larger broker that's over a lot of us, they brought that up on a veteran call. My guess is half those agents were like, I didn't know that you had to have that. You had to, and what's funny, again, bigger conversation that's spurred from the IBS. We talked about how many agents actually do the IBS. The percentages for how many of them do buyer rep, probably even lower or higher depending which way you're looking at it. Meaning not that many do them. Now, make no mistake, I'm not an advocate of that. I am an advocate of having the buyer rep sign because it formalizes all the stuff that we're talking about. But you want to have a fun conversation? Maybe we do this next week. And this is something that's terribly misunderstood throughout the real estate community. The fact of whether you have to have a buyer's rep or not. That's fun academically to discuss. I love it when someone makes the assumption that if you don't have a buyer rep sign, well, then you've automatically become a sub-agent. It's not technically true. It means you probably don't understand the real definition of sub-agency if you think that's what happens. Now, again, for other states, this is different. But for here in Texas, don't ever forget, oral agency, it's allowed. It is allowed. Is it recommended? No. A lot of holes in it. But it can happen. And if it can happen, as long as certain things are said, which we'll talk about in another show, you very well could have a representation with the client without having the document. Again, we do not encourage that. We encourage the buyer reps to be signed, the listing agreements to be signed. But when you start getting to this flow of documents that are supposed to be signed, you'd be surprised how often they are and when they do, if ever, get signed. And this is all important for you because this is laying down the legal foundation, the litigious foundation of real estate, where most agents get in trouble because they didn't rightfully represent the client. They didn't tell them everything that they were supposed to know, which should be your most sacred vow to any client, is that you have the expertise, you know what it is they need to know, and you've told them. Yet here we are having a conversation that it doesn't happen as much as it probably should. So that's something to think about. Now, y'all, that's a very thorough review of the IBS. Now, I know that should be useful for a lot of people because I know in most brokerages, this is not a document that's shared very often. In fact, when I push this show off like I always do, at the end of the day saying you should watch this one, I'm going to flat out say, hey, look, if I were you, I'd watch that. And I would also, if I were you and you have friends, and you know they don't understand it, you might want to watch that. Hell, I would argue that any team leader or manager that watches it should say, y'all should watch this because this is a problem that we have, and there's not enough people that get on this. Not enough people who know it. So this is a very good show. Not the most exciting, not fireworks in the background, but as far as the quality of the information, it's very strong. That's years of learning that document and understanding what it meant. Most people, it's hard to present the academic side of the IBS because they've never taught it. If you've taught it for 15 years at a higher level, you understand what it means. You understand the importance. And you actually understand the goods and the bads of it. And that's what we give to you on these shows. We give you the stuff that we know. We don't charge you for it. We're basically telling you that you should understand these things. It's a learning tool. And what we hope is that it makes you become more loyal to the show and you watch it more often because you realize that the information that you get here is not information you get somewhere else. All right? So I want to thank everybody for watching. We'll be back next Thursday. It is very possible that we might go in to the buyer rep next Thursday, not so much the rep itself as to why we're doing it. We might actually start saying, why are we getting this document signed? What are the consequences or the reasons for getting this document signed? That very well could be a subject for next week. I want to thank everybody. Y'all continue to sell, continue to deal with the market, continue to get through COVID. Hang in there. We are trying to return to some type of normalcy. As always, I love our producer and our owner there. He always throws in there to remind me, we do run a very large group. We do encourage not only full-time, but especially part-time real estate agents. If you have any interest at all in ever joining our crew, you can always go to joinswr.com. We love talking to everybody. We see so many people from so many different parts. And really, whether you're in Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, it doesn't matter to us. We're there in all of them. Go to joinswr.com. We're very clear about what it is that we do. Very different. But if you want this type of expertise, great place for you to be. Y'all, thanks a lot. Y'all have a good one. We'll see y'all next week.